So today, our guest is Kent State University history professor Brian Hayashi. He teaches history of Japan and history of espionage at Kent's main campus. He's interested in race and ethnicity as it applies to Asian Americans from their initial arrival in the late 19th century to the present, with most of his focus centering about World War II. Welcome, Professor.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Once I found the place, you probably did notice I was driving back and forth, right in front of you. Like, where is this place? So I apologize. I was planning to actually come a little bit earlier, and I always like to talk to the audience because my sort of sense is a historian really doesn't have all the answers. And if they're really, really honest with you, they'll tell you there's lots of things we don't know. And so in this lecture, or short lecture, what I'm going to present to you is a puzzle, basically, okay? And there'll be two people that'll appear in the puzzle, and I want you to take a vote as to which one you think is the double agent, okay? Yeah, I mean, this is, lots of people, they love this, like, okay, let's figure this out. And so what I always remind people is that historians, we work with interpretations, okay? And we have to deal with facts, but the facts aren't always clear. And so history is not just simply about the facts. It's about which facts, or what we think of facts, we pull together to pull things together. That's why I always tell people whenever I do public lectures, don't think you know less than me, or that your interpretation or your understanding is somehow less than mine, okay? It's not. And what you have to do with history, as with anything, is you have to make your own decisions, okay? And this is what I encourage students to do. And I always tell them, look, history is neither Republican nor Democrat, okay? That's one of the things you have to learn about history, is it just isn't one way or the other. And sometimes you'll see both come together, okay? And it's really, really tricky. And so I never feel like I have the final answer on any of these things, okay? When I talk just very briefly, it's not about the facts, it's about probability and what you think is the most likely answer, okay? So again, what you think is no less important than what I think, okay? And so you should always make up your own mind about what you think is the situation. So that's basically what I wanted people to understand. It's not like Dragnet, just the facts, man. It doesn't quite work that way in history. Okay, the next. And the next slide, so here's the puzzle, here's the dilemma. Who is that Trojan horse between these two candidates, or between these two individuals that I'm going to offer you? One, in the spy world, this is really, really important, because you have to sort of figure out, can you trust this person? Can you not trust this person, right? And boy, you have to sit there and figure out, well, how do I know this person is trustworthy or not? And then if you put them out in the field, how do you know they're not going to betray you, right? So you have to be a little bit careful when you're dealing with spies. And the spy world can get very, very murky, okay? I mean, there are just all kinds of questions about different individuals and what was really going on. And so I'll go to the next slide. And here are possible factors to consider if you're going to identify a double agent, okay? A double agent, again, is someone who pretends to be working for one side, but then is really working for the other side, okay? And so possible factors might be family, might be education, it might be social connections. Usually spies are people with high social connections, right? Because you want to get that information really, really fast. A good example is like the US intelligence on the Ukraine war with Vladimir Putin. American intelligence is unbelievably good. I mean, they're not just listening to telephone conversations. They got somebody right in there getting all that information. I mean, it's just stunningly strong American intelligence. But they look for generally these high connections, wide connections, and then they look for a person who's employed in certain key industries. Okay, you have to be in a position to catch this information. And so those are the kinds of agents that they're looking for. And, you know, they could be in war industries or military facilities. And then they have communication connections. They have to be able to send the information out. It does no good to have an agent right there in Putin's palace if the person can't get the information out. So you have to have a way to get that information out. So that's what spies are going to be involved in. And then finally, there's the question of loyalty. Who is that person loyal to? One of the first questions that you have to ask when you recruit an agent is, who are they loyal to, right? And then in the OSS during World War II, before any person was brought in, sworn in, they took an oath of office. Oath of office was like, I promise not to say anything about what I did. Okay. And then one of the others is an oath of loyalty to uphold the Constitution of the United States. Okay? So both of these individuals pledged that they would uphold, protect the Constitution of the United States. The same pledge of loyalty that any military person, a soldier, a sailor, who joins up, that's what they have to do. It's that, you know, I pledge to uphold the Constitution, to protect it against all enemies, foreign and domestic, so on and so forth. Okay, we'll go to the next one. Now, here's candidate number one. His name is Joe Koide. But there's only one problem. That's not his real name. I mean, can you imagine? Hi, my name is Brian Hayashi, but my real name isn't Brian Hayashi. Then you'd start looking at me like, I wonder about that guy, right? Well, here's Joe Koide. His real name was, last name was Ukai, and his first name was Nobumichi, and he was from Tokyo. And he joins the morale operations, and this is important to know, because that means he's doing propaganda work. And so he's writing propaganda for radio broadcasts at that time, or literature, and the idea is to encourage the Chinese, fight the Japanese, fight them. And then on the other side is to go to the Japanese and say, come on, give up the war, quit, surrender, right? And so he was trying to get the Japanese to surrender as well. Now the other candidate is over here, he's Korean American, his name is Kun Sung-ria. And he was on special operations. That means he's like going right out to the field, and if you're not sure about this guy, he can wreck your whole operation, right? Now, that's where he was. Why? Because special operations did all these things behind enemy lines. They would go well behind the enemy lines, like in Burma, Myanmar today. There were a number of these agents who went way behind Japanese lines and then gathered together all of these local villagers and said, listen, you don't want to work for the Japanese, you want to work for the Allied side. And some of them did some fantastic things you can read about in my book. One Chinese American medical doctor, he went behind enemy lines and go even farther, risking his life. Why? To take medicine to the local population there. And he would heal these kids, and then just doing that, and then all those villages would suddenly turn and say, we're supporting the Americans in this war. Why? Because look at what he does. He brings medicine, he heals us up, he does all this. Like, the Japanese didn't do that for us, but here were the Americans doing this. And even today, Myanmar is in this big civil war. But in that northern region in Myanmar, they had all these schools and hospitals, all built by Americans who served in the OSS, who never forgot how they were taken care of by the local people. And so they would send donations, and you never hear about this, but this is what these American OSS officers were doing. Because they said, we serve with these people. They're our friends. And so they'd send money over to these rural villages way in northern Myanmar. And that's still going on today. So if we go to the next slide, and I'm trying to be careful of my time there, okay. So here's number one, Joe Koide, the guy who's not Joe Koide. Okay, what do you think of this guy? Well, first of all, he's got a false name. So how much do you trust him, right? I mean, imagine there's a number of females here. If you met your husband and your husband gave you his name and he says, I'm Joe Namath. Oh, okay. And then after you get married, oh, my name is Joe Schmo. Then you're going to kind of wonder, right? Well, this is Joe Koide. You kind of wonder about this guy. And then it gets worse. He comes to University of Denver in 1925. He graduates. The first place he goes is to New York City. Why? Because he wants to meet Earl Browder, the head of the American Communist Party. Okay, what are you going to do over there? And Earl Browder takes one look at him, recognizes his talent, Japanese, English, both languages, and says, I know where to send you. Pop onto this boat, you're going to Moscow. And so he goes to Moscow for training, okay? Why? Training to become an undercover agent for the Communist International, Comintern. He's a Comintern agent, okay? Yeah. Oh, yeah, we're having all these technical problems here. But anyways, what then happens is he comes back and operates underground, an illegal immigrant. I wonder if there's a double agent in that microphone. Anyways, and so he goes to Moscow, gets his train, comes back, lands in New York, meets up with Earl Browder again, and then is sent to the West Coast. And there he is, he's cranking out communist literature. And then what he did, because he wrote a lot of this in Japanese, what the Japanese ships that would always pull into port in San Francisco and Los Angeles, they would pick up the communist literature. The captains didn't know this, but a couple sailors would do this. And they would smuggle the literature onto the ship, sail back to Japan, and then pass it out, okay? And it was very difficult because the Communist Party by 1930 was already banned. And all these communists were leaving Japan because of persecution, right? So they're sending their literature this way, and Joe Koide is one of the ones who does this. Well, he finally finishes that project, is involved in a number of projects. He's translating the history of the Communist Party in Russia into Japanese, and he's working on that. And then in 1938, there was a list that comes out. The Japanese police was very good. They could slip in some of their agents into the Communist Party, okay? And they did that with the Japanese. They had this list of all the Japanese communists in California. One name was missing, Joe Koide. Uh-oh, uh-oh, was he the one that did this? Is he a spy now for the Japanese police? In 1938, I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, we don't know what's going on here. And then, when the Japanese Americans are rounded up off the West Coast and thrown into camps, that's when Joe Koide allegedly says, sorry, I gotta be careful not to hit the mic. I just can't stand this. Because the Communist Party supported Franklin Delano Roosevelt's decision to mass remove and intern all the Japanese Americans on the West Coast. Koide really got upset. He said, what the heck? The Communist Party's selling us out. I'm not a communist anymore. Okay, he's not a communist anymore. So what happens? And this is where Joe Coit is like, you don't know what, he goes, so he's thrown into the camps and in a place called Heart Mountain, which is in Wyoming. And there he stands in front of all the people, the young people, and says, don't be drafted by the United States Army. You should demand your civil rights to be restored first. And so all these young guys would say, oh yeah, that's a great idea. And then the FBI came in and grabbed all those guys and threw them into a camp. Like, tough luck, you violated the law. Boom, you can't just say no to conscription. So then the question then is, was he a double agent? I mean, he's talking about draft resistance. Sounds like he's serving Japan, right? What's going on here? Are you going to trust him to write propaganda encouraging the Japanese soldiers and civilians to surrender? How do you know he's not slipping in some coded language in there, right? In fact, at the OSS, they were checking over every single one of those pamphlets. Boy, can we trust this guy or not, right? So that's candidate number one. Candidate number two, Kun Sung-rie. Here's this Korean American guy. Actually, he comes to the United States very, very late, like in the late 30s, okay? And he comes to study. And then there are real questions about him right from the very beginning, because he doesn't support the Korean independence movement. Now, if you know anything about the Korean independence movement, they hated the Japanese. So anybody who supported Korean independence automatically got a, get out of jail card free. They're loyal to the United States, or at least to the Allied cause, okay? But, so he doesn't join them. And so all these Korean independence leaders are going, you sure you can trust this guy, Kun Sung, How come he's not with us? And if he's going to go on this mission to liberate Korea from the Japanese, where was he? Why wasn't he with us? And so everyone was raising these questions. And then it gets worse. There's Kun Sung, and he's one of these sort of, a number of people raise this question. Kun Sung, are you married? And then the other person over here, Clara Kennedy, she says, yes, we are married. Kun Sung, are you married? Now I can see how you're like, man, can you trust a guy who won't even say he's married to Clara Kennedy? I mean, what are you going to do? But he put on his form, send all my checks to her. So it's just like, and then so the FBI and all these people checked into his background, and they said, well, there's evidence that he was married, and there's evidence that he was never married. So I was like, wait a minute, what are we doing? And so the intelligence agencies really, they just sat there thinking, hey, we don't know about this guy. And so they interviewed like 58 witnesses, all these neighbors and friends, and then this was their conclusion. There is much evidence to indicate that the subject, Kun Sung-rie, will always be willing to sell out to the highest bidder. And he cannot be trusted with any type of confidential information. The subject is regarded with suspicion by all government departments which had contact with him. And these suspicions range from allegations that he's a Japanese agent to statements that he's loyal to the Allied cause but unreliable. And of course, a number of these Korean independence leaders said, you got to remember, he was actually serving the Japanese consulate office in New York City before the war. Do you trust a guy like that? You're shaking your head, oh no, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of like, and the leader of the mission, a man by the name of Karl Eifler, he looks like Ben Affleck, I mean, I think, my book might turn into a movie. And And I thought, oh, okay, if you get somebody for Carl Eifler, then you should get Ben Affleck, right? Oh, like this. I mean, he was literally like that. He looked like that. He grew up in LA, was the son of an oil rig guy, And then he took one look at Kun Sung Ria and he says, no, I need him on my mission. Don't worry, he'll be okay. He'll be okay. Intelligence, the people that clear people, no, you better be careful. You better be careful. No, he'll be okay. He'll be okay. And so they're off, and this is like right at the end of the war, and they go off. And fortunately, or unfortunately, the war ended before they could start their mission. They were actually on the boat going, okay? And then boom, the war ended, and so they terminated the mission right away. So it leaves you with that question: who was the double agent? Let me ask, because now you're all operating as counterintelligence officers. So you thought through family, education, employment. Joe Koide was here in America in 1925. Kun Sung Lia is 1938. Does that play a factor in this? So you're weighing all this. So let me ask you this, because I'm going to try to keep it short. How many of you vote for Joe Koide as the double agent? 1, 2, 3, 4. Can I ask you why? Why do you think he's the double agent?
I think he was somewhat of a good choice in education.
Okay. You're thinking a double agent?
I agree with my husband.
Okay, you agree with us. All right. You can do it that way. Okay. Now, how many of you think Kun Sung Ria was the double agent? There is a double agent in here. Okay. All right. Let me ask you, why do you think Kun Sung Ria is a double agent?
He didn't seem to be able to be trusted with any kind of information. I mean, he was going back and forth.
Right. I mean, there's question marks. But let me ask a couple more people. Who else was it that said Kun Sung Lia? Oh, okay. Sir?
Well, yeah, he was back and forth, and he went for the highest bidder. He would do his thing for whoever was paying the most. So
Yeah.
I think he was playing one against the other. Really, I think both of them were double agents.
Oh, okay. We have a both now.
I think they were in it together.
Oh, they're in it together. Right? They didn't see each other now, because one thing you have to understand about intelligence operations, they always compartmentalize. They keep people separate, okay? So they couldn't conspire with each other. But, yeah, I forgot about that vote. So how many people think both? Oh my goodness, okay. This is really interesting, because I'm going to give you the answer in just 1 minute. How many of you, but before I do, how many of you think that years of being in the United States makes a difference? Anybody think that? Yeah, okay. So what is your assumption? What is your assumption about that?
I just think that culturally, people are going to adopt some different views, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's been the sort of the standard assumption, is that if you're born in America, that's the reason why you got to be born in America to be a president of the United States, right? That's why, what's his name? Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'll be back. Couldn't be the president of the United States because he was born in, Austria or something like that, right? So lots of people assume you have to be born in the United States, and the longer you live in the United States, the more likely you're going to identify with the United States, see your future tied to that country, which is the United States, right? And that's what most people assume. In fact, the law assumes that as well. And legal scholars like George Fletcher, who's a Columbia Law professor, he came out with this concept, he called it the historical self. And he said, well, when a person is born into a family, you don't choose your family, but your family chooses you, you're born into it, you've got no choice. So your identity is created the minute you're born, and then if you continue through the educational system, you're going to identify with the United States, okay? And so he called that the development of the historical self, that as you develop that historical self, you're going to identify with the United States, you're going to be loyal. And the person who just came to the United States didn't really develop that, okay? And so that's why you would question either one or both, as many of you are saying.
Thinking maybe,
Yes.
maybe if you come here as an adult, you could actually reinforce some of the things you don't like about it.
Yeah, I mean, that literally is true. You'll find this with immigrants, that why do you think immigrants sometimes latch on to the old country culture, right? Like you see that with the French Canadians. They speak a French that, today's French people are like, oh, what is that, right? I mean, I grew up in a Japanese-speaking home and learned Japanese, the reading the Japanese characters, Chinese characters, right? And I learned the old ones. In fact, I learned the old pronunciation in Japanese. So when I got to Tokyo, my sister went, don't pronounce it that way, it's this way. I'm like, what, So, give you an example. I asked the cashier for the receipt, and I used all Japanese terms. So instead of receipt, I asked for the uketori, And my sister just elbowed me sharply. Don't say that. Hey, they don't understand that word. I go, what am I supposed to say? She said, recito. Receipt. Okay? I mean, in Japan, that's how it is, I mean, I was using the old words that you don't use in Japan. Why? Because the Japanese language school I went to taught us all the old stuff. I mean, all the kids from Tokyo, I'll never forget when I actually took a Japanese language class, all those kids from Tokyo, because it was more classical Japanese we were studying, they all sit next to me. Why do they want to sit next to me? One of them finally told me, you know how to read this stuff. Because I was trained in the old Japanese, right? So, yeah, I mean, you think then that, they're going to adhere more to that old home country. They're going to remember certain things and say, I think maybe I like the other thing better, right? I mean, it's no surprise you see, at least 10, 20 years ago, all these Pakistani taxi cab drivers, right? New York City, and what were they watching? They're watching the latest imam's sermon, right, on video, and those things happen. In the 90s, the American soccer team came out in Los Angeles Stadium. We're the American team, right? The big American flag. This is Los Angeles, mind you, where the majority of the school kids speak Spanish, okay, as their first language. They're marching around out there, man, we're the American team. And they're like, okay, here's the Mexican team, the Mexican national team. And they're starting to come out. Well, how do you think the crowd reacted? I mean, LA, right? They see the American team and they go, boo, right? They go like, man, I thought we were in America, right? Boo, and then the Mexican national team comes out and they're like wildly cheering for these people. And you're going like, man, what happened, right? And so those are legitimate questions. I think very legitimate questions. However, wait till you see the answer. The answer? No drums, huh? Okay. Oops, what happened? Whoa! Did I do something wrong here? Did I punch wrong? There must be a double agent in this room. Oh boy. I think I better let you do that. And the answer is, go ahead. Da, 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 da. Neither. Look at you know who it was? It was their boss. And his name was Duncan Lee. Ever heard that name, Lee?
Oh, we did.
Like the two brothers that signed the Declaration of Independence? That's the Lee family. Robert E. Lee, the general for the Confederacy. This is his descendant. We're talking about somebody who had long, long roots in America. Not short roots, long roots, okay? Why would somebody with such long roots, stretching all the way back to the Declaration of Independence, why would this guy be the double agent? You know what he would do? He would turn over all that information to his Soviet handler. And he made sure that he kept no notes. So he whispered everything to his Soviet handler. And she took all of that. As soon as she left, she made notes right away and then passed it on to the Soviet Union. Duncan Lee. Nobody believed it. I mean, people were suspicious of him, but nobody believed it because the Soviet intelligence agents were always taught deny, 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 deny. So like Alger Hiss, State Department. I mean, lots of people were trying to say, well, you know, maybe he wasn't a spy because look, he insisted he was innocent to the very end. It's not true. He was guilty, okay? He was spying. And same thing with Duncan Lee. The family didn't believe it until a particular author investigated fully his background and then came to the conclusion that no, he was a spy for the Soviet Union and showed the proof to the family, and the family turned and said, oh, yes, we agree. And unknown to the family and that author, I was doing the investigation too. And I checked, it's called the Vasilyev Notebook. And Vasilyev took notes when he went into the KGB. And he memorized stuff, took some notes, smuggled it out, and then when you match that with the pattern of movement for Duncan Lee in the Venona Project stuff, it matches. And I was like, oh my God, this really matches. This is the double agent right here. And so everybody was looking in the wrong place. And this fits the pattern of what Army intelligence said. Army intelligence came to the conclusion at the end of the war, we were looking in the wrong places. We were looking at Japanese Americans, but that's not where it was. We were looking at these other places. That's not where it was with all these immigrants, these Germans and this and that. That's not where it was. Our problem was it was these old, long, established American families that were the most dangerous. Why is that? Yes?
Was he still angry about the Civil War?
Yeah, it could be. He was still angry about the Civil War. I would argue, that's the short answer, and I think that's a good one. I would argue probably it's because when you have a long tradition of being in a country, you feel a certain sense of entitlement, right? Yeah. See, I saw that when I was a professor at Yale. There were all these kids, you know, that had this sense of entitlement. You have to be at Yale to know what it's like. I mean, I got fed up with it, you know. I mean, it was just like, because I'm like, you know, my family back and forth across the Pacific Ocean. I'm a son of a gardener, you know. I wasn't any of this elite kind of background, right? I mean, I started working, age 7, mowing lawns, shoveling the dog crap into the flower beds for the rich people in Beverly Hills. Yeah, I mean, that's how I grew up, you know. I mean, that was my life. And so when you meet these kids at Yale, it's like, oh, I should have that, you know, I'm going like, wow. Real sense of entitlement. And I think that's one of the dangers when we're trying to figure out loyalty is not to assume that just because someone's been here a long, long time or their families are really rooted here, that they're necessarily going to be loyal. And in this case, I think probably because his family was so deeply rooted, he figured he had entitled privileges that he could do, and that he could stretch the boundaries of, of the Espionage Act and do what he wanted to do, with the assumption that he was sort of helping out the poor people, right? I mean, because that usually, you'll see that among some of these very, very wealthy people say, oh yeah, we got to help the poor people, right? These long, families with lots of wealth for generations. Some of that goes on. And so the problem here was him. And then the context, of course, was the Great Depression, which, in fairness to him, he took one look at it and said, oh man, I'm living a life of luxury while everybody else is suffering. Maybe I should do something. And in the 1930s, so many elite intellectual types jumped into bed with the Communist Party. I mean, that happened not only here, but in Britain, where we know of at least 5 people from Cambridge University joined the Soviet intelligence agency. Yeah, because they took, yes?
What happened to Duncan Lee?
Oh, he got away with it. He was never prosecuted, and then died, he got away with it. Those things happen, right? Yeah, look at the more recent example there, Eric Snowden, right? I go to Kent State. A lot of professors think that he's this hero because he, was a what do you call those people? Whistleblower, right? And in a certain sense, that's true, but you have to look at the other side. And me being an intelligence studies specialist and a historian, I have to look at both sides. And when I look at both sides, I go, oh, okay, it's not quite that simple. And Eric Snowden, for me, is not a hero. You have to sort of weigh, okay, what did he expose? Why did he expose it? And then who did he expose it to? WikiLeaks is linked with Soviet intelligence. He winds up where? In Moscow. So you have to, weigh those kinds of things. Yeah, I like some of the things that he leaked, and the American public should know some of those things. But yet, on the other hand, you have this other side that lots of people don't question, and I question, because I think you got to weigh both sides and then make your own decisions as to where you think you should come out. But that's Duncan Lee, and that is the end of my lecture. So I'll got to leave open some time for some questions, or yes.
I thought there was always a money trail.
Pardon?
I thought there was always a money trail somewhere.
Oh yeah. Well, what's really interesting when you're working for the Soviet intelligence agency, not too much money. Yeah, because there it was all ideology. When you get to the 1980s, the money comes to play. And that's where if you track the money trail, you'll find it, But the problem was in the 80s, the money trail was sometimes difficult to track because they would hide it in, different like Swiss bank accounts or if the guy needed cash, they would stuff it in a dead mouse and leave it in the field. Yeah. I'll teach you that little trick. If you see a mouse in the field, dead mouse in the field, and it's not touched, it could be a drop-off for an intelligence agency. Why? Because you pour Tabasco sauce all over that dead mouse, you cut open the inside, stuff in your microdot or whatever, right? And then the cats won't touch it, nobody else will touch it, joggers won't touch it. The only person that'll touch it will be the person trying to pick up the information. Yeah, that was the tactic used in the 80s with in the Virginia, Washington, D.C. area. some of this. Yeah, that's they do these things. Any other questions? Yes. Let me get here the mic.
Not so much a question, just a comment about a kind of related story. And I know, Gail, I'm glad you're here today because I was thinking about you because I know we have sort of a storytelling. Yes, Gail's a spy now. A sort of a storytelling connection at the NASA Museum to Shion Sugihara, who was working in some capacity with the Soviet Union, but to falsify passports of Jewish refugees. Remember we showed that movie across the street? You were very moved. It's okay if you don't remember. Well, it was called Conspiracy of Kindness. Oh. And it was when we were focusing a lot of our efforts on, I think Nellie Toll's exhibit was on view here, and we have the film director here. And they just had another related program in New York about Shion Sugihara, but it was just interesting to me that the connections to his efforts as a Japanese diplomat, leveraging that to save lives, and kind of working against the Soviet influences for a very worthwhile cause, not being driven by money either, because I guess to your point there was none, which I didn't really realize.
Sugihara lost his career. I met the son when the son presented Sugihara's case at Yale, and it's a real moving story. It's now on movie. I think it's called Persona non grata, if you want to see it. One of my favorite Japanese stars is in that movie. Yeah, he plays the role of Sugihara, and so was a diplomat. Tried all the way to the end when he was ordered out of, I think it was Lithuania, or, Latvia. He's stamping all of these passports to get as many Jews as he can out of there. And so he was just a real hero. It cost him his career too. Anyways.
What do you know about that suburban couple outside of Washington, D.C.? This isn't too long ago, maybe 6-7 years ago. They were passing their information in peanut butter sandwiches, and are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
This one I don't know. No.
Yeah, just the couple next door, and they were in conspiracy with the Russians, and just dropping things off here and there and letting them pick it up. One of them was working in the government, and getting information there, but I heard someplace they were going to make that into some kind of a movie. It's like The People Next Door. You don't know what's going on next door.
I think I've heard of them. Yeah, there's a lot of these kinds of stories. Counterintelligence is most difficult, okay? I mean, the best way to get information on who's a spy is to actually have your own spy in the enemy intelligence agency and find the list. I mean, that's how a lot of them do it, because it's so difficult once they get in to really find them. Because if they're well trained, it's really difficult to spot these people. I mean, even in China, right? I mean, China, they got all those controls systems in place, and still the U.S. gets intelligence out of there. And so, it's a very difficult business. Anyways, I think we're out of time, so I better return the mic back to you. Thank you very much, and you can tell them about this.